If I could have everyone's attention now, please. Thank you. I'm Debbie Costine. I am one of the trustees of the Southborough Open Land Foundation. I always like to, I'll start off by first thanking the library for being an enthusiastic host for this presentation tonight. The Southborough Open Land Foundation is a private, non-profit, not town related, it's not part of town government, it's a private organization with a mission to preserve and protect open land in town. And we're always encouraging and welcoming new members. I also now want to thank the Southborough, thank you Sally, Southborough Community Fund, because they are the ones who very generously gave us financial support for a series of programs about beavers. And we do have some brochures for the Open Land Foundation right on the corner over there. And the last thing I want to do before I introduce Mike is just information for those of you who have not yet seen it. The Open Space Commission is updating their recreation plan, and they would very much appreciate everybody's input, feedback about your interest in open space, what you would like to see, they want to know what everyone in town would like in terms of recreation space and passive and sports types of activities. To fill out the survey online, you would go to the town website, which is southborough.com, or just Google Southborough and you'll probably all been there. You go to departments, and then you go to the Conservation Commission, and then there would be there a link to Open Space Recreation Plan Survey. So we hope everybody takes a little time to find that and fill it out so they can get your input. So now I would like to introduce Mike Callahan of Beavers Solutions. Since 1998, Beaver Solutions have been specializing in resolving human beaver conflicts. In fact, at this point, over 1,000 conflicts have been successfully worked out. Beaver Solutions is a winner of the John Muir Association's Business Conservation Award. Their approach is to offer the best strategy for resolution by understanding how and why beavers do what they do. So just out of curiosity, how many people here have property that personally is affected at this time by beavers?
Wow.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, thank you very much. Mike Callahan.
Thank you, Debbie.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, thanks for asking that question, and thank you all for being here. I didn't get scared off by a little snow, so that's good. So now that I know that some of you are interested in dealing with problems on your own property, that helps guide me. But I also want to know, by a show of hands, how many people are here they want to just learn more about beavers and the ecosystems that they create and that sort of thing? Okay, good. And so that'll help guide me for what I focus on, because I could drone on for hours up here. So we got an hour, so I'll get right to it. So first off, as Debbie said, I started doing this in 1998 and quit my day job and just do this full time, and I love it. It's very gratifying being able to do something that helps resolve problems for people, but also do it usually in a way that's helping the environment. So this is the outline of what we'll go through. Basics about beavers, their biology, the benefits. A lot of people aren't aware that the beaver ponds have a lot of benefits both ecologically and to humans. And then problems, that's why I do what I do, to resolve those, how we deal with them, and what works and what doesn't work so well. So, beavers. They, sorry, there we go. I find that they're very interesting animals. I didn't know that much about them other than they built dams back before I started doing this. And the more I learned, that's what really hooked me on it. And a few basics about them. Their scientific name, Castor canadensis, and they are our largest rodent in North America. So when adults are fully grown, 40 to 60 pounds, they're pretty big, about size of a medium-sized dog. And they live in family units, and there'll be, on average, 5 or 6 beavers in one pond. They're territorial. They won't let other beavers in their pond. So it's generally 2 adults and then 2 years of offspring. Those offspring, once they become 2 years old, will move out looking for a mate and start up their own territory. So there'll only be one breeding female in a pond. And with the 2-year-olds, when they're moving out, that's when there's some mortality because they may be crossing roads or coyotes or whatnot. But that usually happens in the spring, and we'll get more into that later. They're very social. They'll groom each other. The young kits play with each other and wrestle in the water, and they teach each other how the older ones teach the younger ones how to build the dams. And they have to be social because in our climate, once the ponds freeze over in the winter, they're stuck inside their lodge and they don't see daylight for months. So they're living in the dark with their family. Can you imagine? with lethal teeth. So they have to get along pretty well or they wouldn't have survived. And they have survived for millions of years, actually. And so beaver dams, they'll build them out of mud and sticks, and they can be very large. In fact, there's one in Canada you may have heard of. They can see from space. That's how big it is. So why do they put so much effort and so much work? Because they don't have bulldozers, just their hands and their teeth to build these dams. Why do they do that? Whoops, wrong way. So back when they were evolving, there were a lot more predators, saber-toothed tigers, wolves, you name it. So they build these dams to turn streams into ponds so that they have protection from the water, because they're very well adapted to the water. Their hind legs are webbed, so they're good with paddling. They can steer with their big tail as a rudder. They don't propel with that, but they will use it for steering. They have 2 sets of lips where they can actually eat sticks in the water without swallowing water. Their eyes have a membrane that protects them when they're swimming in the water. So there's a lot of adaptations in their fur. The fur led to the exploration in North America because the first white people that came across the continent were the trappers looking for their fur, because back then they made hats out of them, felt hats, and the beaver pelt was essentially currency. And I think it's on the Massachusetts state seal. But anyways, that led the value of the beaver pelts, because they had already wiped them out in Europe, led to most of North America's being explored. And so the reason it's good for felt is the fur has like little barbs that interlock, and there's a layer, 2 layers. There's long hairs and short ones. And so bottom line is that pelt, which now isn't in vogue, so it's not valuable, so trappers really don't trap for fur anymore very much, except for as a hobby. But once upon a time, it was big money. So, I skipped. The other reasons they do they build the dams for the ponds so they can swim up to the trees, because they'll chew down the trees for food and for building materials, and it's easier to transport the sticks they cut up once they're in the water. And in the winter, as I mentioned, when the ponds freeze over solid, Well, they don't hibernate, so they have to store up sticks that they use for food under the water, under the ice. And if the water's too shallow, there'll be too much ice that'll encase their sticks and they'll starve to death. So that's why you see a lot of dam building in the fall when they're trying to get the water up in anticipation of the winter.
Do they know enough to cut the tree so it falls into the water?
That's the question was, do they know enough to cut the trees so they fall in the water? Because most of them do. And I'm skeptical. People did a study on the West Coast for like 10 or 20 years looking at that just came out, and they say they do. But most trees will grow towards the water, so when they cut them, they fall that way anyway. So it's unclear. So let's see, there's a beaver dam. That's a pond leveler pipe I'll go into later through a beaver dam. And you can see how this stream was, like the width of the screen. And once they build that dam, it just spreads out and creates a big area of open water, which has a lot of effects. But beavers will dam anywhere. They dammed right on this old pickup truck out in the woods because it was a good anchor for their dam. And the dam was like 4 feet tall, and they just dammed right through the cab. I don't know if you can see. So, I've seen shopping carts, railroad ties, golf ball, anything. They'll just use whatever's available and build their dams with it. So sometimes people ask if they live in there. No, they don't. There's two different types of lodges. One, a burrow where they'll live in the embankment of the pond or the stream or river, and the other, the classical cone-shaped, I did it again, sorry, cone-shaped lodge out in the water, like you see right there on the right. And what they do is they build up the mud, the sticks, and then pack mud all around it for insulating. So even in the coldest nights, if it's below zero, inside the hollowed out area in there, which you'll see on this next, it always stays above freezing inside. And they don't put thick mud at the top. The top is just loose sticks so that they can get ventilation. So it's pretty ingenious, and they have 2 tunnels underwater, so if an otter or someone unwanted came in, they can get out the other way. And here's the example of the sticks. They'll usually put them very close to the tunnel, so even in the winter they don't have to swim far to get those sticks. They'll just come out, grab a stick, come out, there's this little landing area they'll shake off, and then go up to a higher level where they put grasses and stuff for bedding. And that's what they live in all winter long. And since we're a small group, feel free to ask other questions. I forgot to say that. We can do this nice and informally.
With the less prevalence of ponds freezing over, is that messing with how they live? Is that easier?
Actually, they like it. It's easier. If the ponds aren't freezing over, they can still get access to fresh trees. So there's less risk to them starving during the winter. It's the opposite if we have a real long freeze and the ice stays real thick and they can't break through it, where they may run into trouble. So why they chew trees? The main reason is they're vegetarians and they eat the inner lining of the bark. The cambium layer that grows is what they get nutrition from. They can't really digest the woody pulp on the inside or the thick bark on the outside, but that inner lining of the bark is what they'll eat. They'll also digest twigs and leaves, and they eat other things. Ferns and grasses and water lilies, cattails, those things. Like the cattail and water lily tubers are high in starch, and they'll dig them out and they can eat those. So, but no fish, nothing else. So they also chew trees to build, obviously. And one interesting thing about beavers, if you ever saw a beaver smile, you would say, ooh, because the outside of their teeth is orange. The inside's white. And the orange enamel on the outside of their incisors is denser than the white dentin behind it. So when they chew, the orange wears down slower. So it kind of, the more they chew, it keeps it sharpened as they chew. So they have self-sharpening teeth, which is valuable if that's what you're relying on to cut down trees. And because they're rodents, their teeth never stop growing. So they'll even chew trees even if they don't need food, just to keep them from getting too long.
Have they taken to some of the prevalent invasive species? Like
No,
gooseberries or-
unfortunately, they don't seem to want to go after the invasives. You know, they're, I guess they weren't, I don't know, millions of years they don't want to change their diet.
Too bad.
Yeah, it is too bad. So, that's the basics about beavers. Any other questions about what they do or why they do it? All right, moving on, some of the benefits. And this is important, I feel, for people to know because, you know, when they cause problems, it's easy to say, well, just get rid of them. That's what we've always done. And, but we need to know if we get rid of them, what we're losing. You know, so we have a full, you know, fully informed decision. So when they build these dams and create ponds, the water slows down, it pools, it seeps into the ground, and it recharges aquifers. It also will cool down as it goes in and then join the stream further downstream. And by holding back water, the pond's usually a little below the dam, so if we get a storm, it holds back some of that storm runoff and then lets it go. So the peak flows of streams are lower, and in the summer when it's real dry, these dams that have stored water are releasing water. So the stream flows in the summer when we need it are actually a little higher when you have these dams up in the headwaters. So you get less peaks and valleys, so you get less erosion, you get better habitat downstreams for the fish and other things. And also, a lot of the plants the aquatic plants will take nutrients and other like hard metals and things we don't want in the water and chelate them, take them out of the water so that the water downstream is cleaner. And also by slowing the water, sediment from erosion or runoff from upstream settles out. So there's a lot of water quality benefits, the aquifer benefits, but the bottom one here is probably maybe the most important one, biodiversity. Beavers are called a keystone species, and we don't have many of them. And what keystone species do is they create an ecosystem that a lot of other species rely on, whether it's plants, animals, insects, you name it. And so because they've been around forever, essentially, a lot of species have adapted to what the beavers do. And they rely on the different habitats that are created by the beavers' activity. You know, Native Americans called beavers little people because they're second only to us to change the environment to suit their own needs. And so by changing the environment, they have a lot of effect on other species, as I said, which have co-evolved with them. So just like a keystone in the middle of an arch that everything's resting on, you remove that and the arch falls. Well, the ecosystem is like an arch. If you remove the beavers, that falls too. So biodiversity is an important aspect of why it's good to keep beavers around if we can. And we can't always, but we try. So, questions about that? Trevor?
Sorry if I missed it, but do they dam? Is that instinctual, or are they taught that?
It's a little both. An orphan beaver will dam even if it wasn't trained by its offspring or parents, but it doesn't do a good job. But they do teach the young too, so it's kind of both.
What was his question? I didn't quite.
Do beavers dam instinctually, or is it trained behavior? All right, so some of the problems a bunch of you in this audience already know, unfortunately. You know, wherever beavers dam, they can interfere with what we're using the land for, whether it's agriculture, roads, homes, septic systems. And so that's why, you know, beavers are a lot like us, and that's why we butt heads with them a lot, I guess. So, so there's different ways to manage when these problems come up. You know, sometimes if it's like a hiking trail that's getting flooded, or, you know, we can just easily tolerate it and move the trail, or sometimes people are concerned that, you know, their house is going to get flooded, but they're up on high enough ground that a beaver can never make a dam tall enough to flood them, and so then they realize, okay, they can tolerate that. Because since they make their dams out of mud and sticks, or whatever else, there's a limit how big they can make it. Normal beaver dam is anywhere from a couple feet to 4 feet, but there are shorter ones, there are taller ones. You know, if it's a notched ravine or something, they can wedge it in there, and I've seen a beaver dam over 10 feet tall. But that's really unusual. Usually, if it's just a freestanding dam, it's going to be at the most 3, maybe 4 feet tall.
Is it such that the water seeps through or goes around it? It's not like the water doesn't completely stop and then go over the top, so how does the water get around when there's a dam?
When beavers start building a dam, they won't dam in less than 2 feet of water. They'll pick a shallow spot, and they'll start putting sticks first. And they'll lay sticks in the channel as a kind of a matrix or a framework. And then they'll start pushing up mud up on those sticks, and you know, they'll sometimes dive in the water, grab it with their hands, swim with it like this, and then pat it, you know, wherever they want it. And so dams often have leaks in the beginning, but over time, beavers add more and more mud to the face of it. As it gets wider, you know, it doesn't start leaking. So then water will just seep over the top. And whenever the pond is at like, say beaver, they don't like being on land, so they like to expand their ponds to be able to swim up to trees. So if they've used up the trees that are close to the water's edge, then they may say, okay, it's time to build up the dam, and they'll start adding sticks and mud and raising the height across the whole length of the dam. And that, you know, so when they're doing that, there may not be a lot of water that's going over, but then once they get it to the height that they want it, whatever water's coming in is trickling over and around the dam and continuing downstream. So, any other questions with that? Okay, so sometimes we can tolerate it, often not. Tree protection, that gets probably the most hits on the Beaver Solutions website, but it's pretty simple. If you have questions about it, I recommend you go to beaversolutions.com, and I'll put that up there in a second. But you can see how you know, they'll nibble, and these wood chips, you know, often are like this, that thick, and it's amazing how they can just chomp big chunks of wood off a tree. But it's easy to protect with lightweight fencing wrapped around loosely. I like to go 4 feet high, just so if there's snow, they can't get above it. But they don't climb. They don't have to stake it down. It takes 5 minutes to protect a tree. If you have certain specimen trees, you don't want them to chew. Usually, I only recommend within 100 feet of the water's edge, because they don't like going further than that on dry land. But you know, so if you don't leave enough space, you know, they'll nibble through and get the bark anyways. So, and then yeah, just it's important to leave enough space for, you know, next 5 to 10 years for the tree to grow. And some people have used like Tabasco sauce and stuff that when they chew, and that works. The problem is it rains and you got to keep reapplying it. Other people have used paint, and they mix sand in it and paint it the same color as the tree trunk if they don't want to see fencing. And that actually works too, believe it or not. I guess the grittiness discouraged them from wanting to chew on the tree. But every year or two, you have to apply more as the tree grows and it cracks. But so I've never done that because it's messy and it's a pain in the neck. But it is another way to do it. And there's more examples on the website if you want to look at it. Okay, any tree protection questions before we move on to trapping? Yes?
It just seems that painting the bark of a tree would be great for the tree.
There are some trees that can't do it. That'll kill the tree, thin bark trees. Since I don't do it, I don't know which ones off the top of my head, but you're right. You got to be careful about that. Yes.
How much gap should you leave with the?
It depends how fast that tree is going to grow, but ideally I would leave 6 inches around the whole perimeter of it.
Okay. The beaver's not going to kind of push against that and get in.
No, they don't. I've never seen them when it was properly wrapped like that. I've never seen them take down a tree. Yes.
The third one you had there was exclusion protection. Was it? What's that?
Oh, that's the fencing.
That was below the fencing.
For the
Go backwards.
go back one. Oh, thank you. Let's say there's a big grove of trees, and you don't want to do each individual tree. You could just fence off the whole grove. And so that's what that is. Thank you. I missed that one. All right, so trapping. That's typically how beaver problems were always handled. Beavers were wiped out of Massachusetts back 250 years ago. And it was only in the 1930s that they returned, initially in the Berkshires, presumably from New York State. And when they caused problems, the state would trap them, live trap them, and put them in another spot because they knew the value of the beavers, and so it solved a problem and put them where they would do some good. There's no longer any real good places to put them, so it's been illegal to relocate beavers for forever. So whenever beavers or any wildlife in Massachusetts gets trapped, you have to kill them. So that's unfortunate, but sometimes there's no other choice. Problem is, it tends to be a short-term solution. You take the beavers out of an area, and the habitat's still there. So what happens next spring when those 2-year-olds are looking for a spot to live that doesn't have other beavers? It's right back. So whenever we or others trap, usually 6 months to a year, rarely more than 2 years, you're right back where you started from. But unfortunately, sometimes we've built houses or roads so low in the floodplain, years ago, that there's no room to have any ponding without property damage. And unfortunately, those is what I call no tolerance areas, and we just have to, someone has to trap them every time they move in. That's a kill trap called a conibear trap. That can only be used with a special permit from the town saying that there's a threat to human health, safety, or property. And that's the type of trap that traditionally had always been used by trappers, but was restricted to being used by permit from the Board of Health by voter referendum back in 1996. This type of trap, the Hancock trap, is like a suitcase that live catches them. That's what you can use to relocate beavers. And up close, it doesn't harm them, but they're very confined. So these traps are set and have to be checked first thing in the morning. So if you do have a beaver, you can get them. But like I said, unfortunately, they still have to be killed. So, but as I said, trapping, it is legal. There are times when it's needed, but hopefully we can avoid it. In my experience, about 75% of the time, I can find the middle ground where we can keep them and prevent damage, but unfortunately, there's still times when we can't. Questions? Yes?
So, for all these 2-year-olds looking to find new places where there aren't other beavers, won't eventually we run out of space for them, or is there overpopulation? I shouldn't say overpopulation, but based on our land use, not enough land for the beavers.
That's a very good question. The question was, as they fill up the habitats, where do the next year's 2-year-olds go to? And so they'll be moving around. And sometimes, we'll see beavers that have, I said how they're social. They're not social if another beaver's in their territory. So they'll go after a beaver that comes through their pond. So there can be some mortality. We've seen beavers that healed bites from other beavers when the 2-year-olds were trying to find a place or crossing roads and stuff. So that's a time of high mortality. Interestingly, Massachusetts has been doing a study, it's the only one in the country, at Quabbin Reservoir for about 30 years, and looking at beaver populations in the absence of trapping, because they haven't been trapping, and what they found was the population is kind of self-regulating based on the food supply and the habitat availability. If we remove beavers, the remaining ones will tend to have more offspring. They have anywhere from 1 to 6 per year, typically 1 or 2. But if there's a big food supply, they may have more. If there's not much food supply and there's a density of beavers, they seem to have less. So while there's a fluctuation, even without predators like mountain lions and wolves like we used to have, it seems like food supply and habitat seems to have a big effect on their population.
So my second question is, are there other predators aside from humans who don't want them around?
Not around here too much, although there's supposedly some mountain lions, but very rare. I know out west there's a lot of effort to relocate beavers because they want more beavers for water storage and also for salmon production, because they've shown that the more beaver ponds there are, the more salmon they get. And so they're relocating problematic beavers, and about half of them don't survive because of predators. And it's usually mountain lions out there.
You mentioned otters, or
Yeah, they might. I don't think they do much. I mean, they mostly eat fish, but they will go in their lodges. And yeah, uninvited guest.
There's not a way to get the Massachusetts beavers that are trapped out into the south.
I've offered. And so get a bus, we'll load it up. Yeah. Yes.
I'm just wondering about Giardia, and do beavers get sick with Giardia, or they just carry it?
Good question whether they get sick or not. In my previous career as a physician assistant, I treated some people for Giardia. I've had it twice myself, I think. I'm pretty sure it was. And about 30% of humans are carriers without symptoms. And that's generally how beavers and muskrats and wading birds and a lot of other animals become carriers of it, probably from flooded septic systems or people camping and pooping in the woods or whatever. So Giardia, beavers are carriers of it, and it got a nickname of beaver fever because it's easy to identify when a beaver's in the pond because the lodge is there, but there's so many other wildlife that are carriers also. So some people think if you get rid of the beavers, well, that's not, there's other animals too. So, but whether the beavers themselves get sick, I don't know. I don't know, but I do know they can be carriers of it. So, dam breaching. Here's my one picture from Southborough, behind Debbie's house. Breached this dam. When was it? November? Yeah, this past November. It was a little chilly. But you can, with this clam rake, they'll pull away sticks and pull away mud, and you can let water go with permission from Conservation Commission. And but what will happen is that night, the beavers will come out. I didn't mention to you that beavers are primarily nocturnal. So dusk and dawn is the best time to see them at a beaver pond. But they sometimes will come out during the day, but generally they're sleeping when I'm working and I'm working when they're sleeping. So right now they're sleeping, but when they come out at night, they'll find that and they'll just stuff it right up. So breaching the dam can release water and get the water down in an emergency, but it's not going to last long if the beavers are there because they are just going to repair it. They built the whole dam, fixing that's nothing to them. So. But it is an option for quick. All right, if anyone wants to stand up and stretch, as my reminder. Okay. All right, so now for the meat of how to deal with beavers, is flow devices. Over here, if any of you didn't get them, I have some handouts of 3 basic types that I'm going to go through. How are we doing on time? Anyone? Okay, good. And there's diagrams and descriptions of how they work. But quickly, this is what I like doing the most, putting these water control devices, because they'll work for years and years to prevent flooding. And you know, we can keep the beavers there and creates that long-term solution where we're working with nature, not working against them, trying to always get rid of the beavers. They don't take much maintenance, like the pipe behind Debbie's house. I like to check those once a year in the spring, just make sure that there wasn't any ice damage, which is rare, or make sure the pipe that goes through the dam is set right, but I'll go into more of that. So, you know, I've put in over 12, what is it? Yeah, 1,250 and counting. So they, you know, I can guarantee them because I've done them long enough. I know basically they still fool me, but generally I can tell you whether it's going to work or not. So first one we'll talk about is the pond leveler pipe. So here's a diagram of it, and basically it's a very simple concept. Beavers are tuned in to the sound or feel of moving water. So if you eliminate that, so they can't detect the sound or the movement of water, they won't plug up the pipe. If you just put a pipe through a dam, they'll feel the water going into the pipe and they'll just plug it right up with mud and sticks. But we build a fence cage around it, 5-6 foot diameter cage, depending on the size of the pipe. And that prevents, when the beavers swim by out here, they're kept far enough away from the intake of the pipe where they can't feel any water. You could wait out, moving. You could wait out there and put your hands up against that fencing. Even with the pipe flowing full blast, you won't feel anything. And what's good about that is not only does that fool the beavers, but it never has to be cleaned off. Any leaves or sticks that float up against it aren't going to get held there by any water current. They just float away. So it makes a very low maintenance situation. So these are 12-inch diameter pipes. I usually put 2 of them, so for a total of 40 feet, into that cage, and then float it out into the pond on these temporary pontoons. So this is what it looks like before it's set into the pond. And once they get it out in the pond, I'll release the pontoons. This is my nephew helping me, the other. And he just unties the pontoons once he gets it positioned in the deepest spot and sets it right down there. And it's heavy enough where it will just sink right into the muck, and that's about it as far as setting that in. So I like it because it's pretty simple, you know, low tech, no heavy machinery. Here's one that was going in, and you can see water's coming out of the pipe because the water of the pond is at this level. If that pond dropped, say, a foot, this water would recede and drop in the pipe and it would stop flowing. If the pond filled back up, then it will spill out again. So it's just gravity, it doesn't siphon at all. So it's nice because it won't drain the pond, it'll stop flowing in a drought period. And then you can see there's the cage out there protecting the intake. The pipe itself is just weighted down with a couple concrete blocks. So once it's all done, you know, you don't see much. It's just, you know, this isn't, I like hiding it so the beavers don't go after the outlet end, and it just, you know, that one pipe is controlling the level of this whole pond.
Now, can you create it so the pond would get smaller?
Yeah.
If you wanted to?
Yeah. What's, let me, basically what controls the level of the pond is the height of the pipe, right? So if I dug this trench lower and lowered this pipe more, it would lower the pond, okay? So we can raise or lower and control the level of the pond we need. And what I want to always have is ideally 3 feet of water out here, just so that cage is submerged enough that the beavers don't sense any flow into it.
And my second question is, when you picked up your nephew that morning,
Yeah.
what did you tell him you were doing?
Yeah,
I thought he was going to get ice cream.
Right. Let's go fishing.
Why
Yes.
they don't try to dam up the upper?
They will sometimes, and that's why, like here, I will block off access to the outflow of the pipe. But they're used to, when they build their dams, as I was describing earlier, once it's at the height they want, they're used to hearing water going on that side. And they like working from the safety of the water on the pond side. So they don't do a lot of work on the back side of the dams. They will travel over the dams sometimes, so I always protect them with either fencing or sticks. But yeah, you would think, why don't they just do that? But they don't think like we do, fortunately. All right, so here's one quickly. There was 3 feet of water on this road for the utility. They couldn't access their poles. The beaver dam is over here. So we put in a pipe, lowered the water down, and you can see the cage there, and that got the water from here, you know, drained off of the road so they could access their things. Now, this brings up, anytime I have to drop the water 2 feet or more, and here was about 3 feet, the beavers don't usually tolerate that, and they'll probably build and hold another dam, give up on the dam they have. So what we did was we trapped the beavers that were there, who were used to that very high water level, then drained it down, put in the pipe knowing new beavers would come in, and they did within like 6 months. And that was probably, I think, 5 years ago, and those beavers are still there, and the road's still passable. So the new beavers don't have the memory of that high water, and they tolerate the smaller pond much better. So that's one trick. Don't like to have to trap those beavers, but sometimes if we're called too late and we got to drop it that much, there's really no other choice. Questions about the pipes? Okay. Road culverts are the most common problem I deal with. Probably 60% of the work I do is for town and state highway departments, because the road, a pipe through under a road is like a hole in the roadbed to the beavers. So for a little bit of work, the whole roadbed becomes a dam. So they're smart where they will pick spots that are easy. And so road culverts are always the spot that they love to go after. And once a culvert's plugged, it can quickly, the water, if there's a fair amount of flow, it can flow up and over the road real fast. And then they got to get in there with an excavator and try to unblock it, and it's a nightmare. So it's always a good idea to be able to protect these culverts, whether it's before the beavers do something or after. Because, I mean, look at the shape of this culvert. This is how they usually have to unplug them, take a big pole and ram it out, and it does all kinds of damage to the culvert, and not to mention the cost of the labor and the machinery to be. And then the beavers are going to come out tonight and start doing this all over again. So this is definitely not the way you want to we want to be spending tax dollars.
Have you ever show up at some of these sites and shake your head going, this is really the wrong place to build the road? And that looked like it was right through the middle of a wetland.
Yeah, but what are you going to do? It's there, you know. Yeah, there's a lot of times, whether it's roads or houses, or you go, what are you doing? What I hate is I see a developer wanting to develop, you know, get rid of the beavers, drain it out, and then build. You see that sometimes. Yeah. And then they're just setting up the people to buy the houses to have headaches forever once the next beavers move in. So, culvert fences is a way to protect culverts with specially designed fencing. I like to do like a trapezoidal shape, kind of triangular, for 3 reasons. One is, instead of a narrow culvert, now they got a big area. These fences are usually 12 to 15 feet on the side, so it's a lot more work, and they usually will say, I'm not going to dam there, I'll go upstream or downstream, but leave the road alone. And if they are determined, they'll start damming next to the culvert where they can hear and feel the water moving the most. And as they're damming, the fence is forcing them away from the culvert, which discourages them. And finally, if it can shape it flared out like that, the more they dam, the wider this is getting. So the less water movement is going in the edge, because you're getting a bigger and bigger opening. So that also discourages them. So these fences are successful probably 96% of the time or so, even with the beavers there that are used to plugging the culvert. It's important to have water around the whole perimeter, otherwise they'll just dam off a short off the corner. You don't want that. And this is an interesting one. For about 10 years, the highway department in the Berkshires were dealing with beavers. They kept plugging up this pipe here, and every morning, first thing the highway department would do would pull the grate. And then the beavers got so used to that, they started coming out during the day to plug it up. So I pull up to put a device here, and who's there but a beaver who's swimming in and back and forth, already damming it up, at 8 in the morning, and back and forth. Didn't even care that I was standing right there building this fence that went in there, because it was so used to it. And so this is the fence I put on there, and it never dammed on it. What it did instead was went right up here and built another dam that didn't cause any problems. So all those years a headache, and it was just a matter of discouraging them from damming there, and that took care of it. Sometimes you got to do narrow fences to keep the water around it. Here I have a little wildlife passage that turtles and stuff can get through. And if you bring that up onto land like this, beavers don't normally go up and around with sticks. They like to stay in the water. So it's one way to get otters and turtles and other things to pass through. I've seen a couple beavers who were smart and went through anyways and started damming, but usually you can do that without blocking.
And these will just be on the upstream side of?
Yeah, beavers will dam on the upstream side of the culvert usually. They don't normally dam on the back side. There's just another picture of one up there in the top. If you have two culverts, if you protect one, the water's not going to rise, and then the other one can be a passage. So that's another way to get wildlife passage. I put a little fence there just to catch any debris and keep any beaver damming in front. But you can see they dammed there, but it didn't do any good because this was open. And then a big storm will go through both culverts. So it's another way to get passage if you have two pipes. The other way to protect culverts is using a combination of a fence and a pipe. This is actually my preferred way to do it if I can, because instead of the fence where we're protecting the culvert but we don't know where they're going to go next, here we're letting them dam and controlling how much they can dam with the pipe. So if it's an area that we can tolerate some ponding upstream of the road, then I like to use the fence and the pipe. Because, here's an example a highway department used, and they would just keep pulling at, and letting everything wash through, and very labor intensive. And I have to give them credit, they tried, but they made this monstrosity of a pipe that didn't work. But usually highway guys don't like getting wet, and so I gotta give them credit, at least they tried. So, all that was replaced with this, just a simple little fence on this culvert. This is where that grate was, and you can see how the beavers dammed right around the fence. And then initially that pipe wasn't flowing, but as they built the dam around the fence, the water rose, and then the pipe kicked in. And even though there wasn't much room, and this is only a 20-foot pipe, and before the cage there, they never dammed there because they never sensed any water moving there. They could hear it and feel it going through the fence on the culvert, but here they didn't feel or hear anything, and that's been 4 or 5 years. Again, they completely leave that end alone. And then that other dam where you saw that monstrosity, I just put a 12-inch pond leveler pipe through that, had them pull out all that piping, and that's it discharging there, and that's all you see. And the pipe goes out and there's a submerged cage out there. So pretty simple, and I think that's a key to why it works, because it is simple. There aren't a lot of moving parts or anything like that. So, yeah. And there is a wire cage on that pipe as well as the sticks, just to keep them away from it. But, so it's...
Are the town highway departments getting out ahead of this, and when they build new culverts, doing it as a matter of track putting this in? As they
Some,
build them?
well, I don't know about ahead of it. It's usually reactionary. Yeah. Oh, we got a problem. Yeah.
But, 40 years ago, there was probably a lot less beavers, so.
Yeah, it depends on the area of the state.
Yeah.
In some parts of the state, there's less beavers now than there were 5 years ago. But as they moved east, communities out here are getting them more recently, whereas it's been a problem, for longer in other areas. This is like a man-made spillway. You can see how the beavers dammed up. I'm going to start going a little quicker here. So just putting in the pipe, put the fence on that spillway. You can see how it's floating out there with the concrete blocks, getting ready to submerge it. What did I do? Hit the wrong thing. And there it goes. And that's what it looked like all done. You can just see the pipe comes through the fence and discharges on the inside. And what it allows is these flashboards are now controlling the pond again because my pipe's below them. And so all the beaver damming stays outside and we can control the level of the pond like it was designed by removing or adding those boards. So, here is just a situation where beavers could hear this water, even though it's a trickle, and they just add to the face of it. They don't build up the height of the dam unless water's going over the top. So if that pipe's keeping that permanent leak through the dam, they keep trying to find the leak by adding mud to it, so the dam gets wider and wider over time, but it doesn't do them any good.
There's their home off to the right.
Yeah, that's their lodge right there. So they ain't that far to go. Sometimes, this is an 18-foot wide culvert, and I don't know if you can see it in this light, but there's a stain mark where the beavers had this plugged up that high for many years. They finally opened it up, and then they put this fence on, and then it took 3 pipes to handle the watershed, because there's a big basin in the Berkshires that funnels right down into this. So, so how do these things, what's the success? My success is better than it was when I first started because I know more about where they'll work and where they won't work. And situations where they won't work are typically if we have houses or something that are low in the floodplain and there's just not much room to have ponding, then I'm probably not going to recommend a flow device if the water going up this much is going to cause a problem, because we won't be able to keep ahead of it. Beavers can just keep building new dams no matter what we do. Man-made narrow canals are easy. They can pick, there's infinite numbers of places they can dam. I learned that the hard way. Piped a dam in the Middlesex Canal in Billerica, then they built here, piped that one, they built here, piped that one, and then they said, okay, you guys are gonna lose. So that's one of the no tolerance areas. But and then if it's something that's a river, it's notoriously difficult to get enough capacity to get that water through. So I'm always leery, it depends on the size of the watershed and how much water is draining through, but the higher the flow, the more challenging it is, as you can imagine. All right, so trapping typically, I talked about this before, pretty quickly beavers move back in and you're right back where you started from. This is a graphical representation of the same data. Versus the flow devices, you can see after 7 years, the fences are still, generally working. The only maintenance, I like to keep those clean anywhere from 2 to 4 times a year. So anything that floats up against the culvert fence, when it's just the fence alone, I want to keep that clean so beavers don't figure out to dam on it. So it takes 10, 15 minutes a few times a year. The fence and pipe, you don't have to clean off that fence. It's designed to let them dam on it. So I only check those usually twice a year, and any sticks that got pushed through the fence will pull out and check the pipe. So, these, And then the pond leveler pipe through a freestanding dam is a little more challenging because beavers could build new dams easier. You know, it's not a matter of protecting a road culvert, it's a matter of controlling water in a big area. So the biggest issue can be new dams downstream. And that's part of the site assessment I'll do, is looking at how easy will it be for beavers to build new dams and whether or not I'll recommend going with a pipe or not. So I think that's, yeah, there's the graph. Typical costs, you know, for the materials and labor to install these devices. You know, it's not cheap, but you know, after trapping, you know, new ones move in. Usually it's just one or two, so it's not as many beavers the next time, but it never ends. So generally going with the flow devices even saves money. Never mind all the other benefits. Permits, real quickly, in 2000, the Mass Legislature made it easier to deal with beaver problems, giving the boards of health the authority to issue permits to resolve flooding issues. And so any of those three things are allowed if the Board of Health says there's a threat from beavers. And if we're doing anything to change the water level, the Conservation Commission has to also review it. So that's dam breaching or putting in the water control device.
Is that the original water level or the actual?
What was that?
Is that the original water level of what the pond was before they moved in, or the actual water level after they've moved in?
Basically, if it's going to be a water control device, then it's going to be a new water level, not the original water level, because if we tried getting it down to a stream, then they'll just build new dams. So I only recommend a water control device if there's the ability to have some ponding, that it will be enough for the beavers, but we can limit it to protect whatever we need to protect. All right, so thank goodness for that change in the permitting, so we don't have to go through notice of intents and all big public hearings. So it really makes, within a matter of days, they can usually get the permits to resolve the problem. And that's surprisingly actually what they wanted to happen. A law that actually worked. So to review, we talked about, you know, basics of beavers and, you know, their characteristics, their abilities, and how they are adapted to the water. You know, the many benefits that these ponds have, but the problems that they sometimes can cause and different ways to deal with them. So with that, I'll see if there's any more questions. Yes?
I'm wondering, Mike, if there's any rule of thumb at all about how long it would take the beavers to exhaust the food supply in any given area?
Good question. It varies. You know, sometimes beavers will move into an area and they'll only be there for a year or two, and then they'll exhaust the food supply and they'll move out to another spot. Other times, I've seen beavers in some places that they've been there for 25 years straight. And there's no trees really for them to get, and they're living on the cattails and water lilies. So I can rarely predict how long they're going to stay. But when they do move out, when they exhaust their food supply and they move out, their dam deteriorates and drains out and it reverts back to the stream. And then you get grass coming in to fill, because all that sediment is very fertile. You know, that's why colonists got rid of beavers and drained their ponds, because that was great farmland. Well, you get the grasses growing in, then shrubs, and then trees. And after about 10 or 15 years, there'll be enough trees grown back to the size where it'll be attractive for new beavers. But during those 10 or 15 years, there's a lot of other species that rely on those grassy, shrubby, other habitats. And so that's another aspect of the biodiversity, that even when they leave, that there's still habitats that are resulting from their activity.
The area that I'm referring to is the water pond or swamp, whatever you want to call it, between Ward Road and Main Street.
Here in town?
Yeah, here in town.
Yeah.
And right behind my house, I have the dam, which the state, when they drained that area for the MDC, they put a trench in there to drain the water.
Okay.
Well, they decided to put a dam there. And consequently, we've lost probably between several of the guys there, maybe 30 feet, maybe more of shoreland.
Yeah.
But we're losing all the trees. And the problem is that some of these trees that they want to eat and they've cut down haven't come down. They're leaning against other trees.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a dangerous area in that type of a thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have any problem with thinking that I'm going to get flooded out or anything
No,
else.
good.
But I wouldn't.
Well, you don't want to walk
two
under
other
those trees.
trees,
Some,
you know?
a few widowmakers in there.
Yeah, but and now there was a lodge out in the middle someplace. I couldn't see it, but my neighbor could. Now they got one right on the edge of the shore in the back of my yard.
Okay.
And that just got there this winter. So they're getting progressive, and I don't know about one family. I think there's a couple running around there with a couple of dogs.
Yeah.
But it is causing a problem, and the thing you worry about is, last year I guess it was, one of the neighborhood kids, and we're walking along, and we're on the other side of the trench that they dug. I call it the island, but there was kids walking on that, coming across the dam, and here's these trees kind of leaning and God knows what, and branches are breaking off every day. In fact, I've got trunks in my yard that are this big, and you keep cutting them but I mean, some of them I can't lift them.
Yeah, it's incredible the size of trees that they can
and I mean,
chew through.
The problem there is, what if one of those things falls on some kid? You're going to be in a little bit of a problem.
Yeah, I mean,
And they really, in my mind, I understand we need beavers, and I agree with that, but I think that under the circumstances here, they're causing a major problem.
well, I saw a picture once of a beaver under a tree that fell on it. I haven't heard of any people.
Well,
I don't
I
think it's a
online
big
'cause-
risk, really, even though it looks very hazardous.
I got online one time trying to figure out, they're pretty good engineers, so what are they doing?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I came up with was that it's the male that actually cuts down the tree. The female doesn't go there because supposedly, according to what I saw on the screen, the male doesn't know which way that tree's going. And it's pretty evident in his yard and mine because they're leaning all over. Some have made the water. So the female's smart enough not to go and have it drop on her.
Okay. I know we're out of time. I'm happy to stay and answer more questions, but I want to give permission to anyone who needs to leave. Don't worry, you're insulting me or anyone. So if anyone has to leave, they can go ahead. Any other questions? Yes.
When you have a problem, I get that the culverts, roads, DPW are state, so they're gonna pay for it. But if it's, say, about a river, and it's several houses, who's responsible for hiring you?
That's a tough question. Usually it comes down to whoever's lowest, whoever's getting flooded first. Now, often there'll be neighbors that will chip in, but just as often the neighbors who are on higher ground don't want to chip in, and so it's whoever's having the problem, really. The only time I've seen towns deal with that is if it was on, say, town-owned conservation land. Some towns will take responsibility for it. I was told years ago by someone in Fisheries and Wildlife that there have been some court cases in Massachusetts where someone was getting property damage from a beaver dam that wasn't on their property, and the property owner didn't have any problems, and they liked the beavers and didn't want the beavers gone or anything. And what the courts ruled, I'm told, I'm not a lawyer, but I was told that the court said whoever's having the problem has a right to resolve that problem and go on to someone else's property, but the property owner wasn't responsible for paying for it. So that was how, because they said the beavers are wild animals, they're not under the control of the property owner, so the property owner isn't responsible. So basically it's going to be whoever needs to resolve the problem. Yeah.
We kayak sometimes on the Aspet River, and that seems like a perfect place. They would be damming up all over the place, but as far as I can tell, the stretch we do into downtown Hudson,
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like any beavers are kind of up to what they're doing along there.
Well, that's good. Less portages for you.
Yeah. But it's not the nature of the flow of the water or something, nothing that would account for?
I'm not real familiar with the estimate. I remember looking at a beaver dam on it years ago, and I think it washed out. I never had to do anything there. So I don't know, does that get high flows at times or not?
At times, possibly, yeah.
So it might be a situation where they wash out in high water. Yes?
Do they get it all protective of their children? Like if you come between a mama beaver and their little babies, will they go at you or?
I don't think you'd ever get a chance because the babies are typically staying, the young ones are staying in the water. But I've heard of situations where dogs were swimming in the pond and the beavers attacked the dog. You know, being a canine must think it's a predator. So I would never, I always get my dog out of the water if I see a beaver. I rarely see them. I probably see beavers, even though I'm in ponds all year long, except for in the winter, half dozen times a year. But yeah, I wouldn't let dogs swim, but I don't, you know, I've been in water up to here with a beaver as close as you and me, and they're just swimming back and forth, and they're slapping their tail and trying to scare me to get me to leave, but never. But then when they dive underwater, I was nervous. But I still have all my parts, so that's good. Yes.
Do coyotes go after beaver at all?
Is what?
Do coyotes go after beaver?
Probably if they were able to get a small one on land, I've heard, but not, you know, the adult beavers are way more probably than some of the coyotes, so they're not going to be able to do too much with them. But yeah, I mean, wolves did, but coyotes not so much. All right, I think we're good. Well, thank you all for good questions, and hopefully the roads are okay.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for coming.